What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Paddock, and today I'm going to show you how to play chord outline solos over top of chord changes. One of the questions I'm asked the most by people who are just getting into improvisation is, how do you play over top of chord changes? How do you make the change? How do you know what note goes where, and how do you actually make it from chord to chord? In today's tutorial, I am going to answer that question and give you a really easy strategy to learn how to play over top of chords. If you follow my videos on a regular basis, you will probably notice that my background is different. I am spending some time in Playa del Carmen, Mexico over the winter, so this will be my new backdrop, assuming they don't kick me out of my Airbnb for playing the saxophone. So you might hear some crazy sounds going on in the background, like Latin music on the street or some exotic bird chirping or planes flying over. There's all kinds of crazy sounds happening here. If you enjoy my YouTube content, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and share it with your friends. So let's talk about how to play a chord outline solo over chord progressions. So a chord outline solo is when you take the notes that are in the chord and you use those notes and only those notes to create a solo. That is a great way to learn the notes in the chord and get used to playing the chord tones and navigating your way through the chords. So if you don't already know how to read chords, I've done a bunch of videos on that, so check them out. I will tell you the notes in the chords that we're going to play today, but you should already have a basic understanding of how a chord is built before you're trying to solo using chords. So when it comes to chord outline solos, it's actually pretty easy because we limit the amount of notes that we're going to play, so it's all about the rhythm and making the change to the next chord. So the first chord that we're going to talk about is the D7 chord. So the D in D7 tells us it's based on the D major scale, and the 7 tells us to lower the 7th degree. So the name of this chord is D dominant 7th, or a D7 chord, and the notes would be D, F sharp, A, and C. So it's a C natural because we're taking the C sharp and lowering it by a half step. So it sounds like this. Those are your 4 notes, and those are the only notes that we're going to use when we solo over the D7 chord when we're doing chord outline solos. Now you can repeat notes and you can do different octaves and do all kinds of different stuff like that, but you're only going to use the notes D, F sharp, A, and C. First step and the easiest way to start doing these chord outline solos is just solo using the 1, and the 1 is D. So we're going to play this D7 for 2 measures. It'll sound like this. I'm just going to come up with a rhythm, so I'm going to solo using 1 note. 1, 2, ready. That's it. I'm just playing the 1, and that's the only note I'm playing in the chord right now. One more time. Pretty easy, right? So the next step is adding the next chord tone. The next chord tone is your 3rd, so over a D7, that would be an F sharp. So we're going to play D and F sharp now. So we're going to play 8 beats or 2 measures of the 1 and 3 of your D7 chord, which are D and F sharp. 1, 2, ready. Pretty easy, right? Now you want to make sure that you're not always starting on the D. Sometimes you want to start on the F sharp. And of course you can repeat these notes also. So sometimes start on the 1, sometimes start on the 3, so that everything doesn't come from the root. 1, 2, ready. Before we move on with the rest of the tutorial, if you're watching this video, I'm guessing that you are early on in your journey for improvisation. If that is the case, I'd like to invite you to check out my sax school, the Scott Paddock Sax School, where I teach improv, how to improvise step by step. We go over things like this, chord outline solos for each song that we do. I break down everything so that you understand how every chord works, what notes you're supposed to play, how the scales go with it, how to weave your way between it and make the song or the solo that you're playing sound really good. So if you're looking to add some structure into your practice routine and you'd like a little guidance on getting your improv chops together, check out the Scott Paddock Sax School. I'll put the link in the description below. Now the next step is adding the 5. So in the D7 chord, your 5th would be D, E, F sharp, G, A. So we're going to add the A to our chord. We're going to play D, F sharps, and A. And again, we're going to jump around between those 3 notes. We're going to repeat some notes, and you can start on any of the 3 notes. So the D, the F sharp, or the A. 1, 2, ready. It starts to become a little bit more interesting as we add in more of these notes. Take a listen. 1, 2, ready. If you're struggling with this concept a little bit, go ahead and just start on the 1 and work your way up and down until you get really comfortable. So that would sound like this. So I'm just playing D, F sharp, A, F sharp, D, F sharp, A, and I'm just changing things up with my rhythm. When you get comfortable with that, then try jumping around a little bit more so you get this kind of feel. Then you get a lot more motion going on when you can use all 3 notes and jump in between them. So the last note that we're going to add in this chord is the flat 7, which is the C natural. So we're just going to add the C natural into what we were already doing. So we're going to have D, F sharp, A, and C. And we're going to solo using only those 4 notes and just come up with a cool rhythm using those 4 notes. 1, 2, ready. Sounds pretty good, right? It actually is starting to sound like a solo as opposed to just playing chords. Obviously that just sounds like a chord outline, but when I switch it up and put in a cool rhythm, it sounds a lot more like a solo. Now, I'm doing 2 measures right now just to keep everything really organized, but when you're practicing this, practice it as long as you want. You can do 4 measures, 8 measures, you can just play until you're done playing. It can sound like this. Until you're really comfortable using those 4 notes. Once you get those 4 notes and that 1 octave sounding really, really good, the next step, and a super important step to make everything sound better, is to do it over the range of your saxophone. So you can play any D, any F sharp, any A, and any C on your saxophone. So that would sound like this. That definitely sounds a lot more like a solo because I'm not just playing up and down the chord and I'm jumping all over my saxophone. Now notice I'm not just going from note to note. If I do that, it works, but it sounds a lot like I'm just playing a chord. When I come up with a rhythm and I repeat some notes and do some ideas back and forth, then it starts to sound a lot more like a solo. So you want to try and make it sound like a solo as much as you can. Now, we just learned how to do a chord outline solo on a D7, but the whole idea behind this video is how do you switch from chord to chord. So the next chord we're going to do is the G7. So the steps would be the exact same to figure out the notes and get used to it, practice playing those chord tones. But let's go through it really quickly. So the first thing we do is play just the G, just the 1 for 2 measures. 1, 2, ready. Then we would add the 3. So the 3 is B, so we're going to use G and B now. 1, 2, ready. Then we're going to throw in the 5. So we have G, B, and D. And of course, we're starting on different notes and we're jumping around in these 3 notes. 1, 2, ready. And then, of course, add the 7, which in the case of the G7 is an F natural. So we use all 4 notes. 1, 2, ready. As you can hear, as we add each step, each note in the chord to our chord outline solo, it sounds a lot more like a solo and it gives you a lot more freedom in what you can play. So now we're going to do the G7 chord over the range of the saxophone. So you can play any G, B, D, or F on the saxophone. And it would sound like this. I'm going to do longer than just the 2 measures. I'm going to do until I feel like I should stop. 1, 2, ready. All I'm doing is adding some rhythms to my chord tones to come up with some cool ideas so I can really hear the chord. Now here comes the part that I was talking about earlier. Now we're going to go between the D7 and the G7. So we're going to play the D7 for 2 measures and the G7 for 2 measures. So we're going to switch those notes when we go from the D7 to the G7. So it will sound like this. 1, 2, ready. You can really hear those chords change, and that's what you want to do when you're playing over chord changes, even if they have similar notes. Like the D7 has an F sharp and everything else is natural, and the G7 has everything is natural, so they have all the same notes except for that one note, the F sharp to the F. But it sounds completely different when I play that G7 chord as opposed to the D7 chord because I'm bringing out the chord tones. Take a listen. Here's another example. 1, 2, ready. A really good way to practice making these changes is going back and forth between the two chords. So I'm going to play D7 for 2 measures, G7 for 2 measures, back to D7, back to G7, back to D7, back to G7, just so that I can get used to playing these chord changes. 1, 2, ready. Now, of course, when I'm playing it, it sounds easy because I'm pretty good at doing this. But when you first start doing it, it's going to be a little tough and you're going to have some problems with making the transition. But the more you do it, the easier it's going to get. And the first thing you want to do is limit yourself. In other words, play the one note, then the 1 and the 3, then the 1, 3 and the 5, the 1, 3, 5 and 7. That's really going to help you get used to jumping around on your saxophone. The next thing that's going to be a little tough is making that transition between the first chord and the second chord. Once you get really comfortable switching back and forth between these two chords, you're going to start to hear some things that make switching between the chords sound a lot cooler and a lot better. And that is called having good voice leading. Now, that's not something that we want to talk about when we're just starting with this step, but the more you play this, the more you're going to hear that if you go from the F sharp to the F natural, that it sounds really cool. Or if you go from the C natural of the D7 to the B natural of the G7, it sounds really good. So you're going to start to hear these transitions that sound really good, which again is called voice leading. Let's add in another chord. The next chord we're going to add in is a C7. So the notes in that are C, E, G, and B flat. If you want, you can pause the video and go through all the steps that we talked about on how to build these chords, but I'm just going to go ahead and improvise using the C7 so you can hear it. 1, 2, ready. Again, I'm just using chord tones and jumping around. Now, I'm going to put all 3 of those chords together. D7, G7, C7, 2 measures each. 1, 2, ready. You can really hear those chords change. When I switch those notes up and I bring out the chord tones, the chords really ring out and you can hear that I'm not just playing random notes. One more time. 1, 2, ready. From there, let's add in one more chord, and that chord is going to be the F7. So the notes in that chord would be F, A, C, and E flat. And this is what it would sound like when you improvise on it. Again, I just take whatever chord I have and I plug those notes in, and then I come up with my chord outline solo by coming up with cool rhythms, going back and forth between the notes and jumping around in those 4 notes all over the range of the saxophone. So now let's put it all together and play D7 for 2 measures, G7 for 2 measures, C7 for 2 measures, and F7 for 2 measures, and you're going to hear these chords changing each time I switch up the chord tones that match each chord. 1, 2, ready. And that is the easiest way to learn how to improvise over chord changes. Take the notes in the chord, isolate them, come up with rhythms, go back and forth between them, get it really good, and then switch to the next chord, switch to the next chord. Notice that we practiced at 1 chord at a time. We didn't try to do all 4 chords at once. We did the first chord, then the second chord, the third chord, the fourth chord, and then we put it all together. If you're trying to do it all at one time, especially in the beginning, it's going to be a little bit tough. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. Thanks for taking the time to check this video out. If you now understand how to play chord outline solos over top of chord changes, I'd really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thanks a lot.